Okay, the first step to build software is understanding what problem you're trying to solve. A lot of developers spend hours, days, weeks, or even months of coding without knowing exactly what problem they're solving. So let's simulate a real-world scenario. We want to extend Vidly and add the ability to record rentals. Now, before starting to code, we need to understand exactly how this use case works. So we need to talk to our client or whoever we're building this application for and ask them questions to better understand this use case. Now, let's imagine I've gone through this exercise and I've figured out that as part of this use case, the customer comes to the counter and gives the movies to the staff member. The staff member identifies the customer by looking them up in the application and then adds each movie in the list of movies the customer is going to rent. And that's the end of this transaction. Okay, now to implement this, we have a few options. We can start from the front end or the back end, and there's no right or wrong here. Both approaches work and it's a matter of personal preference. But I personally think it's better to start from the back end because when you start from the front end, you might end up coming up with a complex user interface, and this complexity can leak into your backend design. So you end up over-engineering. But when you start from the backend, you don't care how the UI is going to look like. You focus on the input and output of the application. What is the input here? The ID of the customer and the movies they're going to rent. How we get these IDs is irrelevant. We may look up the customer by their name, their phone, driving license, or whatever. These are the details that can come later. Think of a building. When a construction team builds a building, they don't start with the windows or PowerPoints. They start with the structure, the skeleton. Where PowerPoints and windows will be placed, the type of glass used in the windows, the shower, the bathtub, these are all details that can come later. They don't change the big picture. Building software is the same. As a software engineer, you should focus on the big picture first. So for our new rental use case, the inputs to our application are customer ID and movie IDs. What about the output? In most cases, in video rental stores, as far as I know, there is no output. A video rental store is not like an order processing system where we give the customer an order or a transaction ID. So for now, we're just going to assume that we don't have an output unless something changes later on. So on the back end, we need an action that our front end is going to call later on. Now, we can put this action in an MVC controller or an API controller. Now, just for your information, saying MVC controller is probably not a good way to label this type of controller because MVC itself stands for Model View Controller. But we don't really have a proper term here, so let's just stick with MVC controller for discussion's sake. Now, should we add this action in an MVC or API controller? It depends on what you want to return to the client once the form is submitted. If you want to return markup, go for an MVC controller. Otherwise, if you want to return data and generate markup on the client, go for an API controller. Now, in our application, when the user submits the form, we're going to use JavaScript on the client to clear the form and also display a toast notification. So we don't need any markup from the server, and it's better to put this action in an API controller. This also has another advantage. Potentially, we can build different types of clients in front of this API. We can build a mobile or a tablet app or a single page application using a framework like Angular, React, Ember, and etc. Now here is an exercise for you. You know the input and output of this use case. So go ahead and create a simple API that the front end will call when the user submits the form. This API is the public interface or the public contract of our application that is visible to the front end. What is happening behind this contract is implementation detail, and front end doesn't care about it. Now, for the purpose of this exercise, don't worry about the implementation of the API. Just create the action with the right input and output. Leave the implementation empty or just return a simple response.